my entry into digital marketing, into marketing as a sort of professionalized sport, really came through CRM. And when I was at Kimberly-Clark 100 years ago, back when I was selling, toilet paper hand sanitizer to people, I worked with a gentleman by the name of Zim Zimmerman, who really showed me how much data is in a CRM and how much information is just sitting there waiting to be activated. And for him, that activation was not about showing it to all the other marketing people in the room. It was about showing it to the machines and the algorithms that were being developed so that they could learn something from it and then help you scale your performance media or help you scale your messaging, so that these very powerful tools that were coming online at that time could decide what is the best message to show a human being based on where they were in their customer journey, based on where they were in their buying process, that made sense for them to take the next best action.
There are secrets out there, guys, performance marketing secrets, and knowing just one or two of them can absolutely light up your funnels. Let's go. This is the Revenue Driven CMO. I'm your host, Chris Mechanic. Join me as I uncover the secrets of the world's most elite CMOs and marketing leaders. The Revenue Driven CMO is sponsored by Web Mechanics, the AI-driven performance agency that makes you smarter. What is up, party people? Welcome to another exciting episode of Revenue Driven CMO. I'm your host, Chris Mechanic. Have an awesome guest here. This is going to be an amazing episode. I can already feel it. Our guest today is an accomplished and multifaceted marketer. The type that we really like here. He can easily go from, talking brand and talking messaging in one sentence to then talking performance and revenue in the other. He's got a reputation for driving revenue, building teams, enhancing marketing functions, like all the way from the strategy and development side to marketing and analytics, demand gen, B2B and B2C, just like a really well-rounded marketer and amazing guy who's had a great career in marketing. Recently was at Fleet Core, where he was VP marketing, then on to Asurion, and currently he is SVP of Global Marketing and CMO at Sirva, which is a really fascinating company in the talent relocation space. And we'll talk all about that. But for now, let's give a warm welcome to today's guest, Michael Bailey. How are you, Michael?
Thank you. I'm great. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to see you again, Chris.
Absolutely, man. I really enjoyed our pre-call prep. I think this is going to be an amazing episode. You probably have a hard stop, but if you didn't, we could probably make this 2 hours long.
I know.
And it would be jam-packed with value. But let's jump right into it. You have had an awesome career. You're an amazing marketer. What's one of your big secrets to success?
Yeah, it's a great question. When you asked me this the first time, I had to think about it. I'm like, wow, I don't know if it's a secret really, but I'll tell you my approach. And really my approach has always been to really take a look at the data that your customer experience or your company generates and really find ways to optimize and create feedback loops within your systems so that you can get real actionable insights out of some of that information. And while that seems pretty basic, I find that in practice, it's actually a little bit harder to do. And also in practice, people tend to think that means I get a monthly report on demographics, or I get a dashboard in a PowerPoint presentation in something that I can see. And then I go off and I talk to my content team and I talk to these people and I talk to those people and I get everybody's opinion about what all this means. And to be fair, there is some of that. But my entry into digital marketing, into marketing as a sort of professionalized sport, really came through CRM. And when I was at Kimberly-Clark 100 years ago, back when I was selling, toilet paper hand sanitizer to people, I worked with a gentleman by the name of Zim Zimmerman, who really showed me how much data is in a CRM and how much information is just sitting there waiting to be activated. And for him, that activation was not about showing it to all the other marketing people in the room. It was about showing it to the machines and the algorithms that were being developed so that they could learn something from it and then help you scale your performance media or help you scale your messaging, so that these very powerful tools that were coming online at that time could decide what is the best message to show a human being based on where they were in their customer journey, based on where they were in their buying process, that made sense for them to take the next best action. And he painted this beautiful, complicated picture for me, and I got hooked. And I was like, wow, that's really, really clever. And I've been trying to take these data sets or generate these data sets, and the data has become more rich and more enhanced over the last several years, and really activate them, not just for me so that I can read them, but so that my robots can do it, right? Like I did a keynote a couple of years ago about being a robot tamer, and really taking that information and feeding it back into the algorithms, feeding it back into my MarTech engine, feeding it back into my ad tech engine, and letting some of this very powerful, sophisticated machinery do some of the lifting for scale and speed. And it's gone okay. Like it's been a bit of a ride.
It's gone okay. I mean, that sounds like an understatement. But hold up. So this is Kimberly Clark 100 years ago doing this, and I'm looking at your LinkedIn right now. It looks like what was it, circa 2013 ish?
It feels like 100 years ago.
That's pretty impressive, though. I mean, that seems like I don't think
We
anybody was doing this back in those days.
I think that's really a lot of it, right? Taking advantage of some of the new tech and really finding creative ways to do it. And we were doing stuff when Marketo was just a batch and blast platform, and I think Pardot was still figuring out what their logo looked like. We were trying to push really as far as we could in some of these machines, really beyond the limits of what they were capable of doing, but getting them right to that brink. And it's because there was this idea that people, no matter where they are arriving at a moment with an organization, arriving on a digital, like a landing page or a piece of content download with some kind of intrinsic motivation, some sort of need that they're trying to get met. And you can ask them point blank, like pick your need on a drop down menu. And that's a very specific way to do it. Or you can look at not what they think they need, but what their actions suggest that they need. Like, hey, I want to hear about this kind of content, but I'm also looking at a lot of this other stuff. I don't want to talk to you about it right now, but I'm gonna go investigate in your website. I'm gonna go read your landing pages. I'm gonna attend your webinars. I'm gonna go to your events. I'm gonna click on your media. That sometimes tells me more about a person and more about than they might even know, right? Like I really want this thing, but if all they're interested on this other stuff, sometimes the machine can help you match their unmet need before they even know it. It's the same idea. Like you and I are going to have a conversation today, and then both of us are going to get on our phones later, and we're going to pull up on Instagram, and it's going to suddenly show us ads for things that we talked about. And the question is, is Zuckerberg listening? I mean, maybe, but I doubt it, because if he was, he'd be selling me that data. But I think what's more likely is that you and I have sort of a mindset, and the things that we're interested in and the motivations that we have start to inform all of our other actions. And these very powerful marketing technologies are really good at synthesizing all of that information in a really fast and coherent way and matching us to the things that they believe we need met. And so I think that's cool, right? So doing that at Kimberly Clark, 2013, 2014, whatever it was, understanding that data foundation and understanding that movement of someone through a customer experience, and how to set up the marketing technology to measure all of the different interactions, all of the touch points, all of that content consumption for an effective outcome, has really been the work. It's been the practice for, and I say it's gone okay because, yeah, we've made a ton of money for a lot of companies doing it this way. But I think, there's still more to come. There's more interesting things, more interesting applications that we can put that mentality and that mindset against.
Yeah. So you and I think, have slightly different views of the world. When we were talking about this, I was like, this is a timely topic. People need to hear about it. Like, nobody knows about this. And you said something interesting. You said, I think everybody knows about it, but they just like, it's just hard to do, right? Like, it's just difficult.
Yeah,
I still disagree. I still think that there's a lot of companies that are just doing this, at a
maybe.
very,
Yeah,
either they're not aware of it, or they're doing it, but doing it at a very sort of superficial level.
that's
And
fair.
like a superficial level would be something like, hey, you're in platform, right? And, you're driving to a landing page with a form. Every advertiser, for the most part, every advertiser is going to fire a conversion when somebody fills out that form.
Yep.
But a superficial way to do it would be selectively firing that conversion. So, for instance, like only fire it when it's an engaged session, right? Like
Right.
only fire it when they viewed more than one page or stayed for more than a minute. Like that'd be superficial. I think like folks are hip to that. I would still say that most folks aren't even really aware of the level that you were doing it 10 years ago. But
Yeah.
um, but why do you think that? I mean, the awareness factor of it aside, why do you think that so few are doing this?
It's a great question. If I had the really crisp answer to that, I'd write a book, and then this would be a much more expensive podcast. I
I
think
think
realistically, I think the people, the folks that I talk to, they know that this is possible, but how do you get started is really, really tricky, right? And how do you break the inertia in an organization? And I think that's really hard, right? We talked a little bit about, this is to some degree a different way of doing things, a different new method of doing things for a lot of companies. It's been around for a little while, but the practitioners of it are not, you know, far scattered. There's a few of us, and we try really, really hard. And from my perspective, a lot of that has to do with people wanting to take risks and people having a pattern of behavior and sort of corporate inertia, right? People don't want to change something. They don't want to switch horse mid race, especially if they believe that their horse is in first. And that is, in my experience, where companies get stuck. The time to experiment is really when you're winning, right? Like that's the time to try some of this new stuff. Not when you're panicked, not when you're like, oh man, sales are down and revenue's down and volumes down or whatever. Let me try a bunch of stuff and see what happens. That's sort of a fear-based model of trying to innovate. And innovation out of fear, it can work, I believe. I've not seen a ton of it myself, but I don't want to preclude it from existing. But in my experience, innovating when you're winning, trying new things when you're starting to get a little bit of success, and then not going, okay, that one thing worked. Let me latch onto that one thing and ride that until it stops working. It's like, let me latch onto this one thing. Let me ride that. And while I'm riding this, let me peel off a little bit and go experiment over here too, and see if I can find an even faster, better vehicle to get where I'm going. And I think that's probably hard. It's hard for executive teams. It's hard for my counterparts to get that. They're like, why would we change that? We're already successful. And it's like, well, because you could be even more successful. You never know. And I think breaking that pattern and sort of breaking that inertia of locking down when we found something that really, really works, but instead leaving a little bit of room to continue to innovate, that is, I think, also really critical to actually putting some of this stuff into practice. And that's hard. It's really, really hard for companies because people like sure things. They want a sure bet. They want a sure success. And if they find a groove, they want to ride that groove as long and as far as they can. And that's a very basic human instinct that I completely understand, but it's also the one you have to fight a little bit as a marketer. And you have to say, hey, I know that this is working, but what if this other thing works too? Let me peel off a little bit and try. And sometimes you're surprised. I ran a pretty like doomed to failure experiment when I was at a previous organization. It's Fleet Core. I'll tell you the name of it. And I was like, hey, I don't think this is going to work. Well, it not only worked, it worked really, really well, and ended up becoming sort of the second best performance channel we had behind what was already tried and true. And I was the first one to say, hey, I want to go try this, but I don't think it's going to work. Let's be clear. I want to take a little tiny slice because I want to place a bet that I believe I'm going to lose. And it won. And I was shocked, but everybody made a ton of money, so it was fine.
Hey, exclusive for listeners of this podcast, Web Mechanics will do 10 to 20 hours of work for you for free. Literally no sales calls, no BS. Just give them a problem and they will put a team to work for you for free for 10 to 20 hours, even if you're already a client. If you're struggling with demand gen, lead gen, SEO, SEM, Google ads, LinkedIn ads, conversion optimization, if you can't get Facebook or Meta ads to work for the life of you, or you can't figure out attribution, Web Mechanics will take a good hard look at whatever problem you give them, whatever programs you put in front of them, and they will give you an objective, informed opinion, plus some advice from 10 to 20 hours of senior level attention. So I would suggest take them up on this offer. It's ridiculous. Go to revenuedrivencmo.com/free, fill out the 2-minute form, and you will not regret it. Literally zero downside, unlimited potential for growth. So do yourself a favor, revenuedrivencmo.com/free, no hyphens, no punctuations. You will be happy about that decision. That's really interesting. I'd like to hear that story. So there was a lot said just there. I think lesson number 2 is that the time to experiment, the time to innovate is when things are going well, which is counterintuitive. There's a very well-known saying that everybody's heard, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? It kind of goes directly against that. But I realize you're not saying, hey, bet the farm on something new. You're saying, hey, that's the time when you have a little bit of room to breathe and experiment.
Yep.
I think that's a great takeaway lesson in and of itself. Going back to the first thing, though, we call that revenue-driven optimization. I think we coined that term more or less. And the idea is that you're taking the CRM level data, the back end data, you're feeding it into the ad platforms essentially to inform the algorithm around quality so that they can go out and find some more, et cetera. Is there a name for that? Is that a category? Like, what do people call that generally?
I mean, I do think that people, when they refer to data-driven marketing, I think that's what they mean. I think that's what they want to mean. I think in practice they maybe don't always operationalize that way. And when we say CRM data, what I want to be clear on is CRM data is where you start. The real holy grail for me is actually taking financial data, like taking the stuff from your financial systems to saying, hey, these accounts, these clients, these customers produced this amount of real government-backed money, and taking their IDs and their volumes and how much they spent and what your margin was, and loading that ID and that profile back into your system. So it doesn't just
Hmm.
start, just not their CRM style demographics, firmographics, like that kind of stuff, but also revenue production. Like, what's the size of their account? How much money per transaction are we making? What's the margin per account? And then taking the cream of your crop there and funneling that back in. So that to me is real revenue optimization, sort of revenue and performance marketing at its more mature state. So I think that's what it is. And I don't know if it has a term, because I think people believe they're doing it. I think, again, you ask what the hurdle is, and I think the hurdle is either perceived existing success or tradition. Like, hey, this is the way we do things here. So
That's really interesting too. I mean, I think most folks on the B2B side of the house, like the revenue sort of does live in CRM in a way because like it's
yeah,
not overly transactional. Like the deal lives in CRM and the
the
deal
deal size.
value. The revenue might be processed via whatever QuickBooks
Yep.
or invoicing. Um, in a more transactional environment, that's really interesting. Um, but how does that happen? Like, are you downloading manually this data and then uploading it manually,
Yeah, I
or
mean, it depends on the organization. In some organizations that I've been at, it has been a SQL query from financial system that we pull twice a week and we upload into our ad tech, and we hash the data so there's no PII being transferred or whatever. There's a UUID effectively in Google that one could argue, if Google knows who you are, does everybody know who you are? But it is, at the beginning, it's a manual process for almost everywhere I've been. As it starts to work is when you can start putting some development resources behind it and automating it and letting the robots talk to each other and facilitating that conversation differently.
Mhm.
But yeah, at the beginning, it's always manual. It's always like, hey, I got an idea and I've got to convince my CFO and I've got to convince my sales ops leader and I've got to convince my whoever, name your litany of sort of gatekeepers within your organization, that the marketing team can use this in a powerful way and there's no risk. You got to get legal on board because they're like, oh, you're moving financial information. And it's like, yes, we are. Not It's not going to be a secret. It's transactional information, or it's account size, or it's product utilization data. You talk about in B2B, the deal size is one thing, and I think every revenue ops leader on the planet would tell you that what the sales team says is going to be realized in this account, and what the FP&A teams on the back end tell you is realized from the account. There's usually a delta there, and RevOps sits squarely in that middle. And in B2B companies, RevOps is really a good partner in stitching together reality and saying, hey, yeah, this is what the deal size was, but this was the product mix that this particular account actually utilized, and therefore this is what they actually gave us on the back end. And maybe that mix is not the best for your company. You've got another company that's got a similar size revenue but has a better mix. So you don't optimize the both, you optimize the one that has the better mix. And getting partnership with the data teams and the people who keep track on all that stuff and keep tabs on that database health and integrity, is really the way to go. You start with them, you get them excited about the possibilities, and then you convince them that it's only a little bit of work up front to pull these reports for you, a little bit of work to format the data, a little bit of work for you to then to ingest it into your ad tech. And then again, once you start to see that success, is when people are like, oh, okay, now that this is winning, I'm going to try and change some stuff. And to be clear, I don't think that the only time to experiment is when you're winning. I think you should be experimenting constantly. I think the danger is that people stop when they're winning, and I think that's where I think teams get a little bit lost.
Yeah. There's an analogy there with the sales pipeline also, right? Like when the pipeline's full or like when deals are just closing quickly, it's that part of the
Yep.
cycle. Yeah, it's hard to in that shuffle, it's hard to be like, hey, let's go build more pipeline at the top of the funnel,
Yeah.
right?
Exactly.
We're gonna need
Yep.
it.
Yeah. I
Um,
think the phrase that I love that I learned when I was at Fleet Core doing this, at a pretty good clip, was nothing hurts when you're winning. And I
Yeah.
think that was the sales team, right? Like we had a great pipeline. Why do we need more? And it's like, because we always want more. We always want more. And that was the ethos that we operated off of.
Yep. No, I feel you, man. So when you say ad tech, what are you referring to? Or like, what's your favorite ad tech? Are you talking about, Google Ads in the platform, or are you like talking about Trade Desk
Yeah.
or?
I mean, Trade Desk is great. I think my preferred platform is really Google. I think that they've done a really good job of, and their new SA360 platform has really has brought us light years ahead on what we can action and what we can ingest. Quite frankly, some of the things that are coming out of Meta in terms of advertising services are really interesting too. I think that they really do want you to stay in their garden, but they also are willing to take information that you have that they don't. That you can then action, but let's be honest, they're probably going to action too. They're going to look at that profile and be like, that individual, there's something that I learned about them in their transaction or their relationship with this other company that I didn't have visibility to. Now I do. And so data is the currency off of which we all really benefit and spend and play. And I think that's where, it doesn't have to be sophisticated. It doesn't have to be Google. It doesn't have to be Meta. It doesn't have to be Trade Desk. It doesn't have to be these things, but it should be some of those things. Wherever you're spending money, there is some level of technology, advertising technology that's fueling that capability for you. Look at what the limits of that capability are. I mean, there's what is it, Kenshu? There's like all these things that are built to do this for you. And I think, kind of the same way that we did at Kimberly Clark all those years ago is like push the limits of what your technology and what your CRM systems can do. Salesforce actually can do a lot of this stuff too. Can help you rationalize and pull that data so you don't have to do it in SQL anymore like I used to, and see what it brings to the table. And I think that's part of it, right? When you're looking to build a marketing team and you're really looking to bring talent in or up level the talent that you have, it's how do I get these folks curious and excited and a little bit nerdy about the world that they're in, and that to me is how you build that momentum, how you give them a little bit of taste of success and say, hey, if you're really curious about this, you really want to see go more, point them in that direction and let them go find it. Building that digital machine takes, I talk a lot to other folks about how you build that machine, how you build that digital marketing engine. And for me, it's, it is machine and machinists. So the machine is the technology, it's all of the tools that you have. But if you don't have people who know how to work those machines, then, and you just have the machine, it's an art installation. Sits there, collects dust, costs a lot of money, and everyone can admire it, but no one can get it to do anything. But at the same time, if you just hire the people and you don't give them the right tools and you don't give them the equipment that they need to go attack this stuff, then they're just kind of milling around in the parking lot looking for a better job. So it's really merging those two things together to build that machine, that platform and the people, and then the processes that connect the two that allow you to create something that's really scalable and dynamic.
Hmm. No, this is fascinating, man. And I think that you think that this is kind of mainstream and that this is just like, everybody's doing it, but I'm pretty sure you're at the bleeding edge of this stuff. Like,
Might be in my own bubble. That's entirely possible. It could be because you just get into it and you find like-minded people and you're surrounded like, hey, everybody's pushing really, really hard on this that you talk to, because the people who don't want to push on this, you tend not to. So maybe it could be a little confirmation bias.
yeah, because I mean, just think about, so we have hundreds of clients. The percentage of them that are using Search Ads 360 or even considering using Search Ads 360 is like 10% or less, probably,
Yeah.
right?
Okay.
Um, on that though, what in your view are the things that you can do easily on SA360 that you can't do like just within the free version of GAds?
It's really funny. I've been in the SA360 for so long, I don't know I even remember what the free version will let you accomplish. I will say this, though. I will say that Google allows you to do, whether it's, your bidding optimization or, optimizing to conversion on your websites. Those things are the basics that you can do everywhere. And getting really, really good at that and understanding what that conversion path is and understanding your tagging methodology and understanding the data that the machine itself generates that it can feed itself off of is really, really critical. And maybe if you're just beginning on this journey or you're just getting started on it, look at what you're optimizing to. And if you're optimizing to click, you're making Google a ton of money. If you're optimizing to form complete, a little bit better, because at least you're getting something out of that optimization. If you're optimizing to a quality of form completion, then that's even a little bit better. So I would look at it in terms of a journey and optimize to what you absolutely can within the confines of the tool that you're using to start, and then push it a little bit further and always think, am I optimizing to the thing that really makes my organizational numbers go up, or am I optimizing to something that really at the end of the day makes Google's or Meta's or Yahoo, if that's your brand, like, am I optimizing to their revenue? And I think that's the way to think about it, right? Like, clicks are the revenue of your digital platforms.
Right.
That's I don't necessarily want to optimize to the revenue of companies that are already making a ton of money. I want to optimize to mine. So that's how do you move your metric a little bit further and a little bit further down every time. And
Yeah.
especially in this part, right? Because B2B is not super transactional. It's not high velocity like consumer. Maybe sometimes it is, but like for the most part, it's 10 people can say no, nobody can say yes. They're all going to go to your website. All of them are going to click on stuff. None of them are your buyer, like all that kind of stuff. But it's still important to figure out, like, in that sort of milieu of activity and action that you can measure, what are those actions that are meaningful to you? Does it really matter if someone downloads a white paper? Does it really matter if somebody signs up for a demo? Does it really matter if they request a sales conversation, in your buy flow and in your vertical? And I think that is what's really a little bit different. I'm not an industry guy. Like, I've never really had an allegiance to one thing. I left CPG into fintech and now into an HR space. Like, I've kind of bounced around a little bit, but the common thread for me was always the machinery. Like, how do you build this engine and how do you point that engine at the thing that's meaningful to your organization? And it's different at every organization. It was different at Kimberly Clark. It was different at Fleet Core. It was different at Assurian. It's different. It's different here at Sirva. And so understanding what's meaningful to your organization and how your company makes money. I know that also sounds really, really basic, but a lot
Yeah.
of marketers tell you, like, if they're kind of deep in the marketing organization, they may not know how you make money. They just know that I put up this kind of product stuff, sales does some magic, and then my paycheck clears. And
Yeah.
maybe getting a little bit of understanding of that can help you point your GA or point your SA360 or point your whatever you're using to place your media at the interactions and at the conversion points that make sense for your company.
Yeah. No, I feel you. Let's talk about Servo a little bit. Time is getting away from me. I'm having so much fun here. Um, but yeah, let's talk about Serva. I have a
Talk about
bunch of
Serva.
questions, but for folks that aren't familiar with it, just give us like a little background overview. What do you guys do, or what are you all
Yeah,
about?
so Sirva is a global mobility and relocation company, and at the end of the day, what we do is we get people from one part of the planet to another part of the planet to take advantage of some opportunity that they believe is on the other end of that journey. So, we have our corporate clients through Sirva. We work with some of the biggest brands in the world to help move their employees for new opportunity, for new roles. We also have two of the largest van lines in North America, Allied Van Lines and North American Van Lines, and we help both on the corporate side for people who are just trying to move their office or move their employees, or sometimes just move themselves. When I moved from Nashville to Fort Worth, where I'm at today, I did that on my own. I did that through a company. I had them come and they backed up their truck, got all my stuff, and took off. And so that's a consumer play. So Serve is a company you've never heard of that does a lot of work. We help move people and connect them to the opportunities that they see on the other end of a journey for them, and I think it's a lot of fun.
Ah, interesting. So you settle both businesses and individuals.
We do, yeah. So it's about 50-50 split. So the bulk of our business in corporate is really working with large companies to move their employee bases and making sure that they have a relocation package that makes sense. So if you want to move from Tallahassee to Tokyo, you've got everything you need. We'll help you sell your house. We'll help you buy a house. We'll help you get a rental. We'll help you move your collection of rare parakeets, whatever it is that you need in order to make that transition successfully. If you need intercultural training, if you need language support, if you need visa and immigration, tax help, all that stuff is sort of under
Wow.
the umbrella of things we provide. So it's an interesting world. This industry is not one that I had a ton of outside view in before I joined it. But I was like, hey, that sounds fun, and they look like they've been doing the same thing for a long time, the same way. And those are my favorite kind of companies to join because I like to kind of shake it up a little bit.
That's awesome. So it's more of a service than a SaaS. I mean, it looks like there's a SaaS component, but it's like,
Yeah, I mean, we really do try to merge the human component and the technology component. For us, it really is about building that ecosystem of, hey, all those things that I've talked about. Some of those we provide, some of those are suppliers, but you as the individual on the other end don't really care. You just want to get your process complete, right? So, Serva's really working hard to build an ecosystem where you can do that seamlessly. So it doesn't matter what we bring online for you in order to make that relocation a reality. We're going to do that in a way that you can log into your technology, you can see where you're at, you can see what you need to do next, you know where you're at from a budget perspective if that's the way that your program is managed. And handle it with ease. And I think you do that through a combination of the technology, sort of that platform piece, but also human beings, right? The four pillars of our culture really at Sirva and our ethos are around being smart, helpful, human, and responsible. And, Sirva's got a bunch of helpful humans, and that's what these people are here to do. And sometimes it's a scary moment. I think, our CEO kind of famously talks about of the top five most stressful things that you can do, moving and a new job are two of them, and they're usually happening simultaneously when you show up at the doorsteps of Serva in some way. And so we have to be able to help you through that very human experience. So it can't be all tech and all platform, right? There needs to be some acknowledgement that there is a human being, that if I need somebody, there's a human being at the other end of that, at the other end of the internet for me, and provide that support. But also there's things that I don't want a human for. Like if I want to be able to log in and just kind of get a status update on where's my stuff. So I think
Yeah.
that's the merge, and that's sort of the blend that we do. And what's really fun about this for us is when we're doing that for individuals, that's great. But then we also have an entire HR team or mobility team behind them. It's like, hey, I got to move not an individual, but 45 individuals, and they've got to stay within a budget, and they've got to stay within a policy, and they've got to stay within the compliance and the legal constraints of the things that we've agreed to. And so they have a bunch of different concerns, and so our platform meets those concerns as well, gives them visibility to the things that they need to be able to make decisions about their performance, their program, their budget, whatever, to give them a little bit of a sense of inclusion in this very personal process for one of their colleagues. It's a lot of fun. It's super complicated. It's way more complex and nuanced and involved than I ever imagined. I thought you just threw a bunch of your crap in a truck and magically it happened to end up on the other side of the world somehow. But apparently there's a lot of like worry and people and talent and technology and capability that gets brought online in order to make that happen.
Yeah. And I mean, no, I totally see that. Uh, you guys are probably one of the biggest companies that isn't really a household name necessarily. I'm on your LinkedIn now.
Yep.
3,700 employees it's showing. And a
Yeah, I'll
bunch
get
of
that.
other companies that you own, right? Like Allied, North American, Global Van Lines.
Yep.
So you guys
It's
are a
yeah,
company of companies, it looks like.
we are, and I think it's fun. I've worked at a couple of organizations that are household names, and I've worked at a couple of giant companies that aren't, that are that do great big things with great big swaths of people that they're a little bit more shy and a little bit more sheepish, and they don't put their name out there. Like you don't see us doing Super Bowl ads for Serva. Um, One, they're prohibitively expensive and hard to measure, and two, like that's not really our niche, right? Like we're trying to be very targeted and reach the people that really need us with the name when it matters to them. And that's quite frankly part of our digital footprint technique, right? Like we don't want to blast everybody. We want to go have really, intimate, productive conversations with the people that we need to have those conversations with, and not add to the fury and noise that happens in the rest of the internet.
That's awesome, man. Cool. So I love win stories, right? Like I was tempted to ask you about um the abstract or odd thing that you tried at Fleet Core that really worked, but tell us a win story. It could be about Fleet Core, Serva. Like what's one of the wins that you're most proud of?
One of the things that I'm probably the most proud of is some of the work that we've done here at Serva, and it's a little disconnected from all of like the digital like mechanic and machinery stuff that we do. And for me, it was really understanding how do I, use this technology, use digital, use all the touch points to get to a customer. But what was really fun about my experience at Serva is we started to be really successful when we started to connect our own story, our own people through that technology, through that delivery to our customers, telling about our culture, about how we operate, and so really humanize. So for all the like nerdy tech, and I can get into the machinery with you and talk about like we tried this kind of campaign in Marketo and this sort of Wake the Dead campaign in Pardot one time and all that kind of stuff. I love that nerdy bit, but the biggest success I've really had was taking the service story, interviewing all of the people that worked, not all of them, a lot of people that'd still be at it if I had tried, interviewing a good healthy chunk of the people within the organization and finding out why they do this, why they're in this business, and what motivates them to help the customers that they do. And it was through that conversation that we landed at being helpful and human. And I think that was really cool. And I was like, all right, that's something, but I don't want to just go be a helpful human. That, as lovely as that sounds, is a little soft for me. I'm a little edgier than that. So when we started talking to our clients about what our clients expected from us, sort of what we were and where our clients expected us to be, our clients expected us to be helpful humans, but they also wanted us to be smart. They wanted us to have good technology. They wanted us to have a good approach to data. They wanted us to be responsible. They wanted us to have a good understanding of our impact, both from a ESG perspective, an environmental perspective, and a social perspective. And I was like, okay, I think we do all of that really, really well. So let's build that story. Let's talk about how we're smart and helpful and human and responsible. And then let's use that as sort of the content engine and lens to drive our story, our messaging, and our connection with people through webinars, through digital footprint, through advertising, through events, whatever it may be. And I'll say it's actually gone really, really well. I think we've really hit a note. We unveiled this at a big corporate event that we had a couple of years ago. This idea of being smart, helpful, human, and responsible. This sort of new brand, or better words to identify a brand that we've always been. And I had people literally in tears in the audience when we did our corporate video, and I was being sort of the jaded marketer in the back. I'm like, okay, so that's a little much for me. Like, I don't know that I've ever been brought to tears from a corporate video, but it was, and it was people who had been working with us for so long, and they're like, I finally feel like you get why we work with you, or you get why I work here, and that sort of bridge. And I think that was the win, right? Like, hey, I was at the end of the day, I was looking for some way to juice my machine. I was like, hey, I need some really cool, clever content that's going to be, fun and catchy, easy to say and spell. That's important for SEO. I need that. And what I actually found was this beautiful story of an organization that just really wanted to do good in the universe and build something cool and build a platform where everybody could kind of come together and share on equal footing. And through that, it not only resonated, but it also did give me all the things that I need to run my machine, right? It gave me the sort of the content engine to run that. And I think the response that we've had in market at Sirva based on that work has been incredible. I've still got people who love that video. They say they play it periodically on their desktops. And I'm like, wow, that's wild, because even I don't do that, and my team built it. So I think it just goes to show you that, for all the stuff that we do, all the mechanics, all the optimization, all the data driven stuff that happens at the bottom, at the end of the day, there is still a human being, and there is still a person on both ends of that spectrum, a person trying to get something done and a person at a company trying to provide it to them. And I think if you can find a way to tell that story elegantly and then scale that using all the power of all this digital, wizardry, then that's when you're really successful. And I think, at Sirva, the team's done a really good job of blending those two, to some degree disparate approaches, but when you can find a way to stitch them together, really winning and complementary approaches.
No, that's awesome. I mean, it sounds like you got a good response from the market, but it sounds also, almost potentially more importantly, is that you really sort of gave meaning to the teams that work there, and really sort of articulated a purpose. It's like, I
Yeah.
think a lot of folks in a lot of companies, like they sort of feel a purpose, but
Yeah.
to be able to really take that abstract feeling of a purpose and bring it down into something concrete that they can see and watch
Yeah.
and smell and feel. I imagine that you probably got like, a big boost in morale and a big boost in output and performance from the teams.
I think so. And I think what's fun is to see all of the ways that the teams beyond marketing have tried to take that idea and bring it to life in their own way, in their own discipline. You've got CX teams really trying to figure out how can they really amplify the ways that they're smart and helpful and human and responsible. How can they really, our IT teams are like, hey, we're building this ecosystem. How do we make sure this ecosystem is very clearly smart, helpful, human, and responsible? And it's funny because you say that I sort of gave them this vision. I don't think I gave it to them. I think I helped them put words to it. I think
Yeah.
it was already there. I think it was already baked into the culture. I think it was already baked into these very smart, very talented people. But, for whatever reason, they hadn't taken the time or spent the time to really look inward and think about it and talk to themselves and talk to their clients and talk to their trusted partners and say, how would you describe this simply? And I will be honest, getting to simplicity takes time and brevity takes time. So to get down to those four core words, a whole history, 40 years for some of these folks of why they do what they do was a challenge. Throughout that process of trying to discover like, hey, what's the story that I want to tell of Serva in these really sophisticated digital things we're bringing online? You'd ask 10 people for their opinions and you get 11 opinions. So you really had to wade through that a little bit. But if as a marketing leader, or even a content leader, if you're willing to spend the time and invest and really listen and hear what people say, you'd be surprised at what that does for you to unlock your story, and then what that story then does for you to amplify and accelerate your machine, your revenue machine. And I think that's the other critical piece where a lot of marketers will stop at the story, and those are like, I got a great story. Now I'm gonna put up a blog post and I'm gonna kick up and I'm gonna call it a day. But it's really, that's the beginning. You really need to think about, how does that story then fuel your revenue production? How does that story help you accelerate that place where a buyer's need is met with a brand's value? And that value exchange happens when that story is well, and it happens when you're in the right place at the right time with the right message in the right moment. And that's where digital helps you arrive. So I think blending those two is mission critical. And don't stop short. Don't just leave it to the mechanics to build the machine and disconnect your content and your messaging and your resonance and your product from that machine, because that's just an art installation. And this is just people telling stories to each other in the parking lot. So you really do have to bring the two together to activate a commercial outcome, because at the end of the day, that's really what we're trying to do here. We're all trying to make money and build our organizations and build our teams and build our impact.
No, that's awesome. I mean, that's one of the best stories that I've heard about like how brand work, messaging, identity type of work like actually meets the road. Because a
Yep.
lot of times you see these like extensive brand exercises that happen, and then they'll have something on the homepage maybe, but like not a whole lot
No.
else happens. Talk to us a little bit. Like what are some of the different ways if you're thinking about different channels, like say SEO you mentioned, but like in paid search and paid social, like how are you sort of activating the new brand messaging in like can you give us some other examples across different channels or motions?
Yeah, I would say, part of it for me is really measuring content consumption and channel shift, right? This is one of the things I really looked at, and this is one of the things I learned in the very beginning in my days in CPG, is look at channel shift and how those expectations are met. So, for instance, when I was, early in my career, we had all this environmental and sustainability content, and we were like, okay, this is really, really important to the market. And we looked at measurement, and we said, hey, when people are going to the website, they are downloading all this content, they are reading it, they are researching it, whatever. Sales professional, when they reach out, lead with this. And what we found was, when the sales professional did lead with that, turned the person right off. They were
Yeah.
like, so this is one of those experiments of like hypothesis of this, I know this is going to work. And then you get into practice and it doesn't. You have to really react to the data very, very quickly. The salesperson would come back and be like, they didn't want to talk about this. They wanted to talk about other things. They felt like they had what they needed from the content you provided online. When they talked to me, they wanted to talk about something else. They wanted to talk about a different part of the value. They want to talk about a different part of the product suite. And I was like, okay. So what we started to figure out is we need to play up different things in different channels. So on this one channel, we can play up responsibility, we can play up ESG, and that's important. But when that person shifts channels, when they go into a webinar, they're starting to look at more smart content. That's where we want to look more tangibly. How do I activate some of this data? How do I look at this? When they move into the next channel, they want to talk about human, like what's the experience that we do. So when we're prioritizing our content and we're sort of mapping what content drives what action by channel, we contemplate that a little bit. But like, hey, what is a rational expectation of the medium meeting the content, right? What they say, if content is king, then like channel is queen. You have to make sure that those two things marry, because if you just try and put all the things through all the channels all the time, you're effectively going to exhaust your team. So how do you pare that down a little bit and be a little bit smarter about where you deliver? It's like, hey, in a demo, that's where we're going to talk about data. That's where we're going to talk about some of the intricacies of the way our ecosystem is built. That's the smart pillar being at work in a demo environment, in a one-to-one, in a human conversation. Maybe we don't do demos that you can just blindly stumble through on your own. We talked about that early on. It's like, is that an experience that we want to deliver? We got this incredible ecosystem. Do we want to set up an environment where someone can kind of wade through it unaided? And we were like, actually, no, because that's not helpful for them. Like, that's not the helpful piece. We want to marry that smart and helpful piece in a demo environment where we can say, hey, it's not just you alone with your technology, it's you with us and the technology to try and accomplish that. So that's a subtle nod to the way we merge these things as a brand, in the decisions that we make and how we inform the tactics that we deliver to our clients. So it's always an experiment, right? We're changing it all the time. We're playing with it. Maybe we will do something a little bit different next time, and we'll see how that goes. But that's kind of how we use that brand ethos to drive channel selection and media. In social, for instance, we really try and talk about human stories. We really, that's social media. We want to connect with people. We want to try to make that fit. So we try and bring people into that conversation, and then highlight them through that experience as much as possible. And that drives our engine. In SEO, it's about like, how do I want to be found? What do I want to be known as the technology company that has some people? Do I want to be known as the people company that has technology, or do I want to be known as the company that balances both? And you work your content, you work your keywords. Again, most critically for SEO, easy to say and spell. How do you work your content and your pages and your structures around that idea? And
Yeah.
those are decisions every day. We revisit decisions that are working really, really well and say, do we want to stick with it or do we want to try something a little new? And so
Yeah.
it changes, which is the fun part.
Well, I'd like to give you a compliment. I'm very impressed by you
Thank
because
you.
there's these sort of spectrum of CMOs that I found. Some of them, most of them veer really toward kind of the brand and the story and the message. Every once in a while, you find more of like a response focus, like like real revenue driven. Um, you strike me as a very good balance, a very rare balance of the two. You know, like you can get down and dirty into the weeds talking about the machines and the AI and the data sets and SQL queries, but then you can turn around, and restructure the story and the brand. Like that's really impressive. It's like
Well,
you
thank
don't
you.
you don't see that very often.
I really do genuinely believe that a company is at a marketing team in any organization is its best when it can blend those two. And I will say by nature, I am probably more the nerdy tech spreadsheet guy. I have probably made more decisions out of a spreadsheet than I have off of any beautiful PowerPoint presentation with lovely pictures. Um, but I have such I mean, I was an English major in college. Like everything I learned about marketing, I learned from Shakespeare. And that is, how people are motivated, how they make decisions, what gets them emotionally to take an action. You learn that in literature. Apply that to the machines. And it's like, hey, I can get the robots if I can trick people into thinking a certain way or doing a certain thing, then I can get the machine to get something out of them. And it's like, okay, well, it's not always about trickery. How do you sort of blend those two? And that's where I really try to pull myself to the center. And depending on what the organization needs, sometimes organizations are very brand, sort of what a lot of CFOs call soft metric driven. And then there are other organizations that are so hard metric driven that they lose sight of the need for any of those things. And you can get pretty far without a brand. Like you can make some real money without investing a ton into that. But there's that race is much shorter, and you hit the end of that run a lot more quickly if you don't tell that story, you don't resonate with your audience. So for me, I really do want to sit at that intersection. I never want to take my eye off the prize. I want to make sure that marketing teams have understanding of their impact to revenue, or in some cases have revenue targets that they feel obligated to meet working in partnership with their sales team. I think that's really, really important. But you have to, like in my experience, you need to be somewhere in that middle ground and leveraging both in order to be successful, at least now. Maybe 10 years ago you didn't need to be. You could pick a lane, but not anymore. Everything's coming together too quickly.
Well, very impressive, man. So, hey, I have about 20 more questions for you. I know we have probably 5 minutes or so before we need to wrap. Um, so I think the big question that I'm wondering, and probably a lot of the viewers are wondering about, is well, two things, like what's working really well for you right now? Like what,
Yep.
channels or like what's working really well, and then what are like big challenges that you're struggling with? So
That's a
two.
great question. I would say our social outreach right now is working really, really well. And we're using social media to amplify a lot of other channels. Like we have a roundtable series that we invite, a handful of people to come in and talk to us about specific things that are concerning to them, either by industry focus or by, policy style focus. And we use social media to then amplify the outcomes of some of those conversations. And I think that's working really, really well. That's also
So when you
fueling our
say
webinars.
when you say social outreach, is that synonymous with amplification, like kind of posting, running ads, or is that like one-to-one outreach?
It's 1-2 punch. So it's one-to-one outreach here, and then posting ads and amplifying the outcome of those conversations. Of like, hey, we had these really great conversations with these people, and look at what we get. Look at what we said. Look at what we learned. We want you to learn that too. So I think it's for me, everything is multi-step and in tandem. And using social media to grab and have that conversation, and then using that same platform to extol the benefits and the virtues of that conversation has been really, really helpful to not only our pipeline, but also to our clients. Our clients love it. They want to come into our roundtables. They want to, a thing that started off as a prospect engagement activity has really become something that our clients are like, well, we want to be in that conversation. We want to know, what's happening too. We want to hear from our peers. And so that has really translated into a webinar series where we do have a little bit more broad conversation, bring in experts and a little bit of a different format, but again, amplifying that and creating reach in social channels, pre
Got
and post
it.
to make sure. So
So the
it's,
one-to-one portion of it is basically recruiting those roundtable participants,
yep,
who may be prospects or maybe customers, and
whatever they
then
got. Yeah.
create that content, amplify it on social. Very smart.
Absolutely. Yeah, so it's I think that's working extremely well. It's also helping quite frankly, it's helping our email program do really, really well. So when we take that same format and we give even greater depth in an email outreach or in a newsletter or something along those lines, we're seeing our open rates go up. We're seeing our click through go better. Not click through rate. That metric drives me a little bit nuts, but like actual like just throughput on email is improved in relation to some of these other things. So I think that's working really well. We're launching a podcast now next, so we're doing this at Sirva to talk about some of the things that are interesting to our industry. We'll see how that goes. We're growing that audience too, and we're using social to amplify and create reach for that message. So I think social's been a real win for us in the B2B side. On the consumer side, obviously, paid media is still my favorite. It's just my favorite thing. It's so much fun to play. Put $10 out, $100 out on the back end is just a fun game to play every day.
Yeah.
And then today it only came back with $99 a day. I was able to get $100 for $8. Like that is a fun sort of like, you know, video game to play, quite frankly. So I think
Yeah.
I'm blessed that I have the ability to kind of look at two things.
That's awesome. Um,
Challenges. I don't want to forget challenges because I know that that's incredible. I would say for me still, even now, even at Serva, the challenge is getting people to try new things when stuff's working. Like that is always my challenge. Tradition is my biggest albatross. Like it is the having people do things a way that has worked for them for a long, long time and getting to try something new is the biggest challenge I have ever had at any organization and will probably be so until I retire. And I'm good at selling this idea. I'm good at selling this capability. I'm good at showing production through in my financial reports. But even then, it's real. Like I've always said tradition is just peer pressure from dead people, but we've got real traditions that you have to break in order to try new things. And I think that was my problem 10 years ago. It's my problem today. It will be my problem in 5 years.
what's one thing that you want to try that you can't get buy-in for?
Oh God. That's a great question. I don't really worry about that kind of stuff too much, but what I want to do something like performance art next. Like I want to really like do something wildly experiential, something that can activate a huge group of people all at once in some sort of digital fashion that I can measure quickly. And the what's in my mind is, if you've ever been to like one of these big stadium concerts and like, I can't get tickets, but like T Swift, she's up on stage and she does something, and then all of a sudden, all these wristbands are like making stuff happen. There's data that's driving that. There's like people that wristband knows where you are in the stadium to light you up, that kind of thing. I would love to find a way to create an experience like that for a customer at their desk so that they feel a part of a community even when they're separated, but then gives me all kinds of information on the back end of where were they, what were they doing, how did that work, like did they get a reaction, did their heart rate go up, like that would be amazing. But I have no idea how to do it. I don't
Yeah.
even know what, but I just have this vision of everybody getting this incredible experience all at once as a part of a movement together, and then just seeing what kind of data gets generated on the backside. Like, what could you do with all that wealth of information? I see what you could do with names and email addresses, 15 years ago, and it got us pretty far. Well, imagine what you could do if you actually had like where people were when they received it and what they were feeling and what they were doing and what they did next. How cool would that be? So
That would
that's
be super cool. Yeah, like eye tracking or sort of like emotional
some
type of.
amazing. Yeah,
I could
and they
totally
can't.
envision you like pitching that in a board meeting and people looking at you like you had two heads.
They're like, what is he?
What are
Honestly,
you
like some
talking
sort of like sort of drug induced
about?
like mania are you in? And what's sad is it's usually just caffeine and curiosity. So I think that's the like that would be fun. Like what's the like really big pie in the sky, like outlandish thing that I could never do that no board member's ever going to give me a check to go write because they don't get it. And honestly, it's probably a bad idea. And they should keep me in the stable a little bit on some of that stuff. But one day I'm gonna
Yeah.
trip over a giant bag of money and no rules, and we'll see what happens.
Yeah. Well, Michael, thank you so much for your time here today. Thank you for sharing some of your wisdom. It was incredible. I learned a lot. I was inspired. I'm incredibly impressed by you. I'd love to continue the conversation. I think that you're just full of valuable insights, and like literally, we could probably record 5 episodes. and I still wouldn't even just be scratching the surface of your knowledge and experience. So I really appreciate you. Folks that are listening, if you learned anything or were inspired here today, why not drop us a like or a comment or share it with your friends? We definitely appreciate that. Michael, for folks listening that would like to learn more about you or Servo, where would you direct them?
Find me on LinkedIn, Michael Bailey. I think it's Michael Bailey Marketing is my LinkedIn handle. If you just search Sirva and Michael Bailey, you'll usually find me. So look for me there. I would also encourage you to follow Sirva, even if you're not in the relocation space. We're doing some really fun stuff, and I've got an incredibly talented and motivated team. And you can see what we're doing in reality, in the wild, just by following and seeing what the team does there. And I think, on all of our social channels, LinkedIn is probably my favorite one right now. It's where I'm doing the most widgetry. And yeah, I would encourage anyone to follow along and let me know. Reach out if you've got something to say. If you think that what I've said is complete BS, I'd also love to hear that.
Awesome. Yeah, well, we'll include those links in the show notes here. Michael, stick around just 1 second. We'll wrap up. But for everybody else, that was another exciting episode of Revenue Driven CMO, and we'll see you next time. And that's a wrap. Thanks for joining us here today. For show notes and other episodes, visit us at revenuedrivencmo.com. That's revenuedrivencmo.com. And hey, exclusive for listeners of this podcast, Web Mechanics will do 10 to 20 hours of work for you for free. Literally no sales calls, no BS. Just give them a problem and they will put a team to work for you for free for 10 to 20 hours. Even if you're already a client, if you're struggling with demand gen, lead gen, SEO, SEM, Google ads, LinkedIn ads, conversion optimization, if you can't get Facebook or Meta ads to work for the life of you, or you can't figure out attribution, Web Mechanics will take a good hard look at whatever problem you give them, whatever programs you put in front of them, and they will give you an objective, informed opinion, plus some advice from 10 to 20 hours of senior level attention. And that's just because you're a listener of this podcast. So I would suggest take them up on this offer. It's ridiculous. Go to revenuedrivencmo.com/free, fill out the 2-minute form, and you will not regret it. Literally zero downside, unlimited potential for growth. So do yourself a favor, revenuedrivencmo.com/free, no hyphens, no punctuations. You will be happy about that decision.